Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Basically, the book makes one argument that the conflict has only ever been about one thing and one thing only, that the Palestine Arabs' top priority, as we bring a quote from the British foreign minister in 1947, is to prevent the establishment of a Jewish state in any part of the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And as a result, the conflict, contrary to what people would love to believe, is a zero-sum game because, at least from the Palestinian Arab perspective, their ultimate goal around which they are organized is to ensure that the Jews have zero. What we argue in the book is that the West has actually fueled this idea, which in an updated version of the book we now name Palestinianism, the singular obsession and ideology which is singularly obsessed with the non-existence of a Jewish state, and that the West has fueled and funded it, mostly through an organization called UNRWA, and allowed essentially the Palestine Arabs to persist in their view, generation after generation, that one day they will win the war that they have been waging for the last century, almost century and a half, to ensure that the Jews have nothing. There is no indication that there is any change in the Palestine Arab ethos of a complete rejection of a Jewish state. And the way that we test it is there are two very effective and incredibly reliable litmus tests. They are called perpetual refugeehood and the right of return, which is not a right or not a return. But just to say, when Palestine Arabs have said over the years that they support a two-state solution, some have, we, and many in the West, have made the crazy assumption that one of the two states is the Jewish state. But when they say two states, it's an Arab state in the West Bank and Gaza, and another Arab state to replace Israel through this idea of refugee. Again, they're not refugees by any international standard, and return, which they have no right, which is the mechanism by which Israel becomes an Arab majority state. So actually, and in the book we show that, it's very powerful empirically that there is no moment in the last century, century and a half, where the Palestine Arabs have a vision of peace, where there is a Jewish state anywhere to be found. So when you talk about the Egyptian case, Egypt has an identity that is separate from its opposition to the existence of a Jewish state. It probably would like Israel to disappear, but Egypt can stand on its own in terms of a national identity. So you could at least cut a deal, which, by the way, it's important to remind people, is a weird deal. It's actually very rare in history, it's unheard of, that the victor is the one that has to give land. Abba Eban, Israel's famed foreign ambassador to the UN and Minister of Foreign Affairs, said after the Six-Day War that this is the first case in history that the victors had to sue for peace, and the losers, defeated, demanded unconditional surrender. By the way, a pattern which we see right now. With the Palestine Arabs, unlike the Egyptian Arabs, they do not have a collective identity that is not organized around the rejection of a Jewish state. There's some reasons for that, the way that the lands of the Ottoman empires have been divvied up. But essentially, if you take away Palestinianism, there is nothing that connects the Arabs of Gaza and the Arabs of the West Bank and millions of Arabs living in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, and that really separates them from Jordanian Arabs or Syrian Arabs or Lebanese Arabs. It is an ideology, which again, in the book we show has been fueled and funded by the West for decades, that is singularly focused on destroying what the Jews have built rather than building for themselves. So if this is the ideology and there is exactly zero evidence that anything has changed in that, then the only path to a two-state solution, and this is where you said at the end, is there any world in which this is possible? And my answer is yes. The world in which this is possible is the world where the ideology of Palestinianism dies and is replaced by an ideology that I've come to call Arab Zionism, which sounds like a crazy idea, but it is merely the idea that Arabs and Muslims, based, by the way, on their texts and their histories, understand that the Jews are merely a tribe of the region, and that the state of Israel is simply the modern expression of the historic and uninterrupted connection of the people of Israel with the land of Israel. Once the Palestine Arabs decide that they want a state next to a Jewish state, which I call Arab Zionism, then it's possible. But right now, we cannot want for them what they've never wanted for themselves. Certainly, this is where the hope lies. And it's an important hope, because the people of Israel being in the land of Israel, if you combine that with the fact that the 7th century Arab conquests of the Levant and North Africa have been hugely successful, mean that as long as the Jews want to be sovereign, and Jewish sovereignty is only in the land of Israel, it means that they are damned or destined to remain an ethnic, linguistic, religious, and national Jewish minority in an overwhelming Arab and Islamic Middle East. So the only true path to peace, even if you just think about it logically, is if the overwhelming majority, the Arab Islamic majority, looks at the Jews in the land of Israel not as foreigners. All the names, white, European, settler, colonialist, they're merely synonyms to say, you're foreigners, get out. Once the Jews are embraced as a people of the region and the state of Israel as the modern political expression, then you can have true peace. And indeed, the developments in the Gulf with the leadership in Saudi, in the UAE, with the Abraham Accords, shows the future direction. After the Abraham Accords were signed, I co-wrote an op-ed with two young Emiratis, a man and a woman. You spoke about the next generation. They were young. And the op-ed opens with the following phrases. We're proud Muslims, we're proud Arabs, and we're Zionists. That's how they described themselves, and they were not shying away from the word. And they basically described the older generations as having wasted so many resources, and the most valuable one, the resource of time, around this obsession with the non-existence of a Jewish state. And they were like, enough. And what they also added is they said there's no contradiction between a proud Arab and Muslim identity. That's what I said. Arabs and Muslims have a civilizational content that is not dependent on being anti-Zionists, on rejecting Jewish sovereignty. It's a rich civilization that can stand on its own. So yes, you can have a vision of Arab Zionism, essentially a proud Arab and Muslim identity, that through the Arab and Islamic texts and traditions and knowledge of history embraces the state of Israel as the modern expression of the historical connection of the people of Israel with the land of Israel. And this is the vision of peace that I speak about and promote. I sometimes joke that I'm a long-term peace activist. This is, I say that for many years. I'm working on a book in Hebrew now that will have the lovely title of Peace Not Now. And the argument is that we've spent and basically wasted decades on shortcuts. Direct negotiations. Okay, if it's not Arafat and Abu Mazen, if neither of them will sign, let's just get out of Gaza. All kinds of things that are essentially shortcuts, attempts to achieve peace now. And my argument is that we need a process of the transformation of the ideology of the Arabs of Gaza and the West Bank and those in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon from Palestinianism, from this singular obsession with the destruction of the Jewish state, to Arab Zionism, to a proud Arab and Muslim identity that can live next to a Jewish state rather than seeking to erase it. And certainly the countries in the Gulf and the leaders show the way. So I'll take the two separate arguments. Has Israel over-responded? I have repeatedly argued, and this might sound odd, that Israel has under-responded, and it's not about kind of the bombs and all that. What I think Israel's greatest mistakes in the conduct of this war is the first is badly defining the enemy. And when you badly define the enemy, your war is a mess. The enemy is not Hamas. It's a comforting myth, but the enemy, Hamas, is merely the executive arm of the ideology of Palestinianism. There is no opposition to that idea anywhere across Palestinian Arab society. Hamas is merely the most lethal and recent executors of that ideology. So I would have liked an Israeli leadership that after October 7th, I will say if that's the leadership we would have had, we would have not had October 7th because they would have understood that we have a bigger enemy than just one single organization. Israel should have said, we are going to war at the minimum against Gaza. We know that when the people of Gaza thought that their executive arm was successful, they were elated. You saw euphoria, and the euphoria was everywhere. And it was not because some like breaking out of prison, we know that lie was immediately revealed, because they finally saw their dream. We talked about the dream that was indulged, the dream of no Jewish state. They saw through the GoPro cameras. So sometimes people say, oh, what, you killed them all? And I'm like, which history books have you been reading? When war was waged on Nazi Germany, on Imperial Japan, the war is waged in a collective. Roosevelt in December 1941 did not declare war on Japanese pilots. He did not say, Japan, we're cool with everything. We're just going to go in, find the pilots, kill the pilots, and we're out. The idea was that the war is waged collectively, surrender is made collectively, peace is made collectively. People seem to forget that. So I think we made a terrible error, which again, I think people made the mistake of thinking that it's more PR-y easy to say that the war is against Hamas rather than against Gaza, or to bring the ideology of Palestinianism to an end. But that's what I think our leadership should have said. On October 7th, we should have said, we begin a war, which we should have started a long time ago, to bring the ideology of Palestinianism to an end. As long as this is the ideology that connects the Arabs of Gaza and the West Bank and millions in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, there will never be peace. And just like in Europe, just like in Asia, the ideology that is at the core of all the wars, like Nazi Germany, like Imperial Japan, like Palestinianism, has to die. So in that sense, I think we underwent to war, and that's why it's so difficult. You can't win a war that is based on a lie. Go ahead.
No, I apologize. Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Sorry.
We also did other things. Once we told that lie, we caved in to the notion that we need to supply our enemy at a time of war. Again, insane. In what war is it expected that you supply your enemy as they refuse to surrender, they fight you, they hold your hostages? And this is somehow not only assumed as expected, it's if Israel fails to do so, it's somehow going against these absolutely invented rules. I always remind people that international law for war was not written by pacifists. It was written by people who understood that wars need to be waged and won. And, everyone who understood war understood that if you're supplying your enemy, the war is never going to be over. And the law says you need to enable people to supply, sure, only women and children, and only if you know that it doesn't give the enemy an advantage, which we know it does. So the amazing thing is Israel has exactly zero responsibility, and yet so many people pretend that it does. And also, I think we fail to call out Egypt and certainly Qatar on their terrible double game throughout. So I think actually in that respect, Israel undermanaged the war. When it comes to the hostages, we caved in too soon, in my view, on the fact that you negotiate for them. Like, we've completely accepted that the Palestinians invaded Israel, kidnapped people from their beds on a Shabbat morning, elderly women, children, families, and that now it's a negotiating situation. We should have been at that moment making it clearly that we're going crazy. And again, not in terms of bombing. People in Israel tell me, Einat, the Biden administration would not supply us if we would have cut off everything from Gaza until the hostages return. I think that would have been a very powerful message on day one. From our side, Egypt is welcome to supply them. They clearly supplied them before October 7th. But from our side, from the lines through which we were invaded, we're not supplying the enemy, and nothing goes in until every last hostage comes back. And people said, well, we would have gotten no bombs. I said, fine, don't bomb anyone, but make it very clear that nothing goes in until every single last hostage comes out. Make it clear that the Hashemite regime in Jordan and in Egypt, no one is going to be safe. We're going to go crazy unless all the hostages are returned. And again, instead, we agreed to this kind of slow-moving negotiations that has only served to keep the enemy in power. So I think, actually, to the extent that people... Okay, so now this is my view about the conduct of the war. But in terms of whether this is what's turning people away, as someone who has studied the rise of anti-Zionism, and especially the thing that I've come to call the placard strategy, because you see it in anti-Israel placards, these equations that equate Israel and Zionism and the Star of David with every evil word. I've carefully followed the effort to blame Israel for genocide for at least 15 years. So what we saw on October 8th, it was beautifully said by Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour, this eruption around the world and in the West, he called it a symbolic participation in the October 7th massacre. So rather than a response to the Israeli response, it was actually an enthusiastic, euphoric participation in the massacre through the actions on American campuses and in the media. Now, I actually think to those, so there is this group, and that's a group that clearly what they saw on October 7th was not what Israel did, what they saw what can be achieved. They were thrilled and elated by the possibility of a vision of a world without Israel. Those who are frustrated with Israel's conduct with the war, here is where I do blame ourselves, but again, I blame us for failing to draw a very clear line that says we have exactly zero responsibility to supply our enemy at a time of war. Get them to surrender and the war is over. But we play into that, so then people are like, oh, so you're not supplying them this way, but you're supplying them. Rather than being very clear, it is not our responsibility. It's insane that you even expect it to be our responsibility.